Well, Mr. President, thank you very much for the invitation to be here today. It's a real pleasure to follow on from Helen, who I think is a real inspiration, and thoroughly recommend the book if you haven't already got a copy. I think exams are over, so you've all got plenty of time to be reading and everything else. I'll try and give you a little flavour of, yes, I think where we are now, and that was a really good question, because I do think that by changing women's rights and girls' position in society, that's how you change. That is how you change society, basically. Not the only way, but it's a very important way. And Helen, you mentioned the suffragette film. And I remember watching Suffragette. They did a special screening in Parliament. And I was Secretary of State for Education and Minister for Women and Equalities at the time. And there's a great, I think, a quote at the beginning from one of the members of Parliament who says, you know, in the debates, what on earth? Next there'll be cabinet ministers. And I thought, yep, guilty. I'm one of those, absolutely. And I did have to chuckle because I was due later on that evening. That was a very nice interlude in my day, because I was then due to go on to Newsnight later on to be grilled by Evan Davis about something. And I thought, I wonder if the suffragettes knew that what they were actually doing was setting the sisterhood up to be grilled on Newsnight. So, but there we are. That's what goes with the job. Look, I think it's really easy for us to take for granted in 2018 the amazing advances in the way that our country and society has changed just in 100 years. I mean, the fact of the matter is that, ladies, you wouldn't be sitting here 100 years ago. I wouldn't have been able to qualify as a solicitor. I certainly wouldn't be one of the 208 current female members of Parliament if it wasn't for the sacrifice of some enormously brave women. I thought that was a great question. I don't know if you saw the other, if you also have some time, that we were just talking outside about the Lucy Worsley programme that was shown on Monday night. And I hadn't appreciated really before that, I hadn't really stood to think about the enormous scale of violence that those women, yes, there were some violent actions, but also just imagine being force-fed 200 times. I mean, the suffragette film is incredibly sad. I don't want to give away the plot line, but what the lead character goes through with her son and her family, you know, these are real sacrifices that people made to enable us for women to vote. And of course, don't forget, the other thing in 1918, it wasn't all men that could vote as well. So that was another big societal change that had to happen. But to go and to give us a vote, and those of you who are involved in politics or thinking about it, you know, there is nothing more depressing than going and standing on a doorstep and talking to men and to women who say, oh, I'm not going to bother to vote, nothing changes. I mean, the good news about the 2016 referendum is I think people do realise that their vote can change things now. We can debate that maybe later and everything else. If we want to go into a controversy, but it's so depressing, and even worse when I hear women, often older women, say, oh, I don't get involved in politics, I leave all that to my husband. And, you know, I just hope that all of you, the fact you're here today, means that you will never ever do that. Even if you go and spoil your ballot paper, it is critical that at any opportunity for you to exercise your right to vote, that you go and do it. As I say, it's easy for us to take for granted. I mean, there are things now, voting obviously one of them, but the fact that we as women can actually hold our own property. There was a point when if you married, your property, anything you owned, automatically became the property of your husband, including yourself. You know, marital rape was only outlawed in the 1990s. I remember my father, who was a barrister, coming home and saying, you know, this is actually going to be a major change. Before that, frankly, when you got married, to say your body wasn't your own, your children weren't your own, you didn't have rights. Even just my mother, who is now in her 70s, when she got married in late 60s, had me in the early, I was born in 72, there was no question that she was going to carry on working. When I got married in the year 2000, you know, one of my bosses came in, this is a big city law firm, and said, great, congratulations, I guess you'll be going to have children soon. So, you know, assumptions still happen, and I'll talk about some of the challenges I think that we still have. And of course we're having a debate now about abortion in Northern Ireland, which is also incredibly political, very difficult. But the fact is there are still societies, if you listen to some of the remarks of some of the MPs in the House earlier on this week, where actually they still think it's acceptable for women not to have control of their bodies and make decisions. And I'm staggered that that's allowed in 2018. So what are the stats on women in Parliament? Well, 489 women have been elected to Parliament since 1918. There are now 208 women MPs. It's the highest number ever. That's 32% of the House of Commons. Interestingly, there are 207, I think, female peers. Well, that might have just changed with the most recent announcements. My party, there are 67 women MPs. You know, undoubtedly, the Labour Party have done better than we have done. And actually, we went backwards in 2017, which many of our campaigners, people like Baroness Anne Jenkin, who's really tried to lead the way on Conservative benches on this, you know, are incredibly disappointed by. It took until the 2017 Parliament for there finally to be fewer men in this current Parliament than the total number of women that have ever been elected. So we now have 422 men in this current Parliament, as I say, 489 women elected since 2018. But you might say, why does it matter? Why does diversity matter? Surely we want the best person, you know, to be there. Well, I would argue, of course, that women make fantastic members of Parliament. I have a slightly self-interested reason for arguing that, but I think it's true. And I think that at the end of the day, we make up 50% of the country. Why would we not want there to be, and I support the 50-50 campaign, but even if we get close to 50-50, why would we not want 50% of the population to have a voice in what is ultimately, forgive me, slur to the Durham Union, but ultimately the House of Commons is the nation's most important debating chamber. I'm sorry about that, yes, I'll move swiftly on. We want to hear different views on the important issues of the day. I mean, I think the abortion debate in Northern Ireland is, of course, you know, a typical example. But even on things, you know, and everything, we want to hear, I think, a good diversity of views of different backgrounds. And of course, we're talking particularly today about gender diversity. There are many other forms of diversity. Sexuality, ethnicity, religion, all of that is important, and that's something that needs to be reflected in the House of Commons too. I think Helen talked about changing social norms, and actually you're only going to change social norms if you have the voices there to be heard. Voices outside Parliament are, of course, incredibly important in terms of raising issues, challenging us, making us think about things and how we vote. But actually what you want also are voices inside Parliament who are going to challenge and want to change social norms. And look, things are changing. Undoubtedly, we have debates about, I should also say in this, men are incredibly important. So there is a phrase, men as agents of change. And we can't change. And actually, I think one of the, perhaps the unsung stories of the battle for female suffrage was actually the men who supported the women. And that's true. So chaps, don't think you've got away with this. You know, you've got to go and champion the women around you at all stages of your life and your career. So there are things like, obviously, I'm particularly looking at the Women in Finance Charter, for example, at the moment, and the Treasury has been doing that, so the place of women in financial services, and that's just one little part. Women on company boards. Now, look, not every woman wants to be a FTSE 100 director or chief executive. You know, I get that. Some people, that would be their worst possible nightmare. But the fact is, having women at the top of organisations does matter. Leadership matters. That's why having a first and second female Prime Minister matters. That's why actually the Labour Party really does need to have a female leader of their party, as do other parties, you know, as well. It's very impressive. Even if you disagree with them, the fact that actually in Scotland for a while the leaders of all three main parties were women, I strongly suspect changed the tone and the nature and the way the debate was conducted. So I'm going to pick out some issues about, you know, what do we still need to tackle. Occupational segregation. You know, there are still far too many, and my former role as Education Secretary, there are far too many girls who count themselves out of certain careers and studying certain subjects far, far too early on. That's a fault in the education system, but it's something that we can all help to tackle by challenging stereotypes and making sure, please, if you're advised to go back to speak to your old schools or other schools, about encouraging people to come to Durham, to do different subjects, please take that opportunity. You are really powerful voices. You know, the gender pay gap, that was one of the things I was really pleased to start those regulations off. It's very important, disclosure, transparency. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, and transparency on all these issues is really, really important. I think the whole atmosphere in the Palace of Westminster has changed the more women that there are. It's not perfect, and I think the recent harassment allegations show that. And there are some shocking examples of MPs and the way that they run their offices, they treat their staff, and they treat other people. But it has changed. Even in the 8 years that I've been there, it has definitely changed. women on both sides of the House worked together in the first Parliament I was in 2010 Parliament, to change the hours. We still sit on Mondays until 10 p.m, Tuesday and Wednesdays till 7, and Thursdays until 5. But at one point, it was, when I got there in 2010, it was Mondays and Tuesdays till 10 p.m, and before that, it used to be people slept throughout the night. This is impossible for people who are trying to combine it with any other form of life, and this applies to men and women. Both men and women are parents. Actually, if you're trying to bring up a family, you've got to have an environment that is going to offer you certainly easier working hours. And that's not just for the MPs, that's for the people working in Parliament too. I've talked about the role of men as well. The other thing I think is unconscious bias. One of the things that we identify in the work we do on women in finance and on so many different fields is this unconscious bias that people show, sometimes making assumptions on behalf of other people. That, oh no, she wouldn't want to take that on, that wouldn't suit her responsibilities, or actually we won't put somebody forward for a promotion because clearly they'd be uncomfortable working in that particular department. Those assumptions are made all the time. I'm sure we all make them. When you're voting for new Durham Union officers, or when you are thinking about which courses to sign up for, all sorts of things. We have to challenge ourselves all of the time. And I think I wrote a recent pamphlet for an organisation called Bright Blue on gender discrimination. And I think that unconscious bias and sexism, if you like, misogyny, is now much more insidious in society. So what are the battles that we still have to have? Well, frankly, we just need more women in Parliament. There are different ways of doing it. The debate about quotas and all-women shortlists and targets never goes away. I'm not entirely sure that having such mechanisms drives cultural change, which is actually what really needs to happen, which is actually that parties stop thinking a member of Parliament looks like this, and they just accept whoever it is that presents themselves and wants to be elected. As I say, we've never had a female Chancellor, we've never had a female Defence Secretary. I'm sure there are other positions in Cabinet and on the opposition front benches, as I say, where women have never held those positions. We were talking outside about harassment and social media platforms and what happens to people in public life. And I suspect, not people who aren't in public life. We have in Facebook and Twitter and other social media platforms, there are some great things about them. Clearly, members of Parliament, we communicate with our constituents much more easily. But we have also created platforms which allow misogyny, sexism, racism, anti-Semitism, and all sorts of other things to reign unchecked. And on Monday morning, I was just saying that I was about to give evidence, and the defendant pleaded guilty in a case where somebody had decided to send me a death threat, other members of Parliament a death threat. And these things are happening more and more often, and it is obviously completely unacceptable. So I think Parliament has got to work out, departments and others, how we're going to deal with that as a sort of issue. I think the other thing is financial inequalities between men and women. Undoubtedly, lots of women don't make provision for life as they go on, pensions, savings, everything else, and we're doing some work on that in the Treasury Select Committee at the moment. And finally, of course, it's not just about politics. We're talking particularly about Vote 100, when we get to the vote, we're thinking about politics. But in many other fields, unfortunately, it's still difficult to, it's not impossible, but there are still assumptions made, there are still not enough women at the top of financial services, or the city, or media. Again, why does it matter? Well, actually, we don't have, I don't think, I think we've got one female editor of a national newspaper. One. And media shapes how we see the world. It's incredibly important that we have a diversity of thought at the top. Education is another one. We don't have enough female head teachers. We have lots of female teachers. We don't have enough male primary school teachers either, actually. So in terms of getting that balance right, but what is it about wanting more women? For many girls, the first person they'll see in a position of leadership is going to be the head teacher of their school. If all they ever see are men, then again that immediately makes them assume that men are the people that will be in those leadership positions. But I'll just finish there, because there are some, as I say, many advances, many good things have happened in 100 years. And back in the late 1980s, there was a little boy who was going on a tour around the House of Commons. And obviously, this is a time when the Queen, still on the throne, was there, but also Margaret Thatcher as Prime Minister. And eventually, after talking about the palace and the royals and the monarch and the Prime Minister and everything else, this little boy put his hand up and he goes, "Miss," to the tour guide, are men allowed to sit on the throne or to be Prime Minister? So, you know, it's not all bad, and there are some advances, but, you know, we do have some way to go. And I hope very much that in this room, at least, there might be some future female members of Parliament, and some men as well, but more women for the future. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Nicky. That's fantastic speaker. Do we have any questions on either of the points raised by Nicky? Yeah, any thoughts, questions? Yes.
Yeah, two very short questions, if I may. Firstly, all within parliamentary shortlists, good idea or not? And then secondly, when we hear inappropriate language from the upper echelons of Westminster, so I'm thinking John McDonnell at Estimate Bay, David Cameron when he said calm down dear in Westminster, how do we deal with that? Should there be public apologies? Should there be disciplinary action? What's the best way of approaching that?
So, two really good questions. I think on all these shortlists, undoubtedly it has driven change. And as I say, the Labour Party have a better track record of getting more women into Parliament than the other parties, certainly the Conservative Party. As I said in my remarks, I think my worry is that it doesn't drive cultural change within the party or within the organisation. And so people feel eventually that they're just paying lip service. And as we've seen with some of the, and I'm not making a partisan point here, but I know with some of the local Labour parties, when they've had all the shortlist imposed on them, that's actually caused a lot of resentment if they haven't wanted it. And that can lead to bad relations between the local party and the candidate, which seems to me an unfair place to put them in. So, but I do, as I go older, I get more bullish about quotas and everything else. And I do think that, you know, my party's got a couple of years in which I've said to find, you know, get more women into safety. We haven't started selecting yet, and then I think we'll have to take a look. If we're still way behind, you know, below sort of 90 to 100 female members of Parliament, I think there's going to be a bit of a riot in the Conservative Party actually on this. And secondly, your point about remarks. Look, I think it's really important these things are called out, and I do think public apologies are important. I mean, undoubtedly in the House of Commons, we've all done it. You know, in the heat of the moment, you say, you know, stupid things, and the quicker the apology, the quicker the realisation that it's unacceptable. And of course, I mean, it's difficult, isn't it? You know, there are grades of stupid things that people say, ranging from the just using a stupid word or an outdated word or something to something that is almost an incitement to violence and you know, really cascading somebody. Whether there are fines or there are consequences, I mean, personally, I think for a lot of this, reputational damage, and the fact that certainly for those of us in public life, everything's always there forevermore on YouTube or on the internet, I suspect concentrates minds. People, you know, it's difficult, isn't it? It's that battle. I'm going on to talk in a moment or a bit later on this afternoon about York, about universities. And free speech is very important, but it's that line, isn't it? And undoubtedly, things that were acceptable to say even 10 years ago simply aren't anymore. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to stay up to date with that, not just to say, oh, well, it was fine in my day, because it clearly isn't anymore.